what we've seen, interestingly, is badging and the concepts of being able to get specific skill sets and access to these things that are very specific to a trade. So having access to information in a quick format, but also from a training standpoint, being able to customize and access that is increasingly important. So when looking at, employers can now see very specific skill sets and certifications that may not take a lot of time or may not be part of, and we're starting to integrate this into liberal education as well too. But I think that those are some of the areas where workforce can get quickly skilled up on some of those specific things at home, or a company can provide some of that training in the offsite hours to get those employees so they can upskill if they're already existing at a company.
Yeah, I would say absolutely accurate. As an adjunct professor at WSU, I couldn't teach without the network, literally. My students watch about 10 to 12 YouTube videos a week. So I use YouTube quite a bit. There's a lot of things on there. Yeah. More than just cat videos. But but I think when you first asked that, I first thought about the medical school that WSU got approved for last year. It's going to take its first students in the fall of 2017 based out of the Spokane campus. For this last 2 years of their experience in medical school, a portion of students are going to come to Vancouver. And they are going to be here. They're going to be working in the hospitals. They'll be doing like the residency or whatever those things are called the last couple of years, where they're really working with the hospitals and the local clinics. Well, last week, the CIO from Pullman and the CIO from Spokane, my counterparts, were here. And we were here specifically for figuring out how we're going to support the medical school in a very modern way across all these different campuses. And it will be based in Spokane, but it's also going to be here serving Southwest Washington. And you may not know it, but the reason we got approved for that medical school is because Washington has a shortage of doctors every year. The number I was told was 400 doctors. That means we have to import those from other states or from other countries, right? So it's exciting that we're going to have this medical school now here for the state of Washington. And one reason WSU is going to be good at it is because of the technology. And Spokane and Pullman, they all have this great 10 gigabit connection and those type of things between them. We don't have that here. I need to get it as soon as possible.
Joe, any thoughts on the workforce?
I've had some time to think here. Well, I can just talk a little about the applications that we have been hearing a lot about that are driving things now from the companies in our area and the medical industry, and that's encryption. The amount of bandwidth needed for the encryption alone, not the content, is greater than the services people can buy right now. So we get a lot of calls from people that are saying, hey, why don't you build that? We're up against the wall on people that we've got at remote sites, people that are working internationally for us, and we need the fiber to more premises and more regional facilities just for that reason alone. Well, when we came up with this bright idea, we went over to Olympia to a hearing, and I could barely get into the hearing room because it was all attorneys from the industry all the way out into the hallway. And there we sat. We had a chair in the room, and there was a lot of resistance. Because change is always bad, and it's regulated industry. And if it's not the regulations tripping up these companies, sometimes with unintended consequences, I think they sure saw that a government entity or quasi-government entity going out and building infrastructure wasn't a good idea either. Today they partner with us on builds and use a lot of our network. The phone rings constantly to do things together. It's 16 years later. But the original concept, it took 2 times in the legislature to get it through, and there was a lot of concern. I think they felt we were going to compete, pick winners and losers, do other things the government does so well, and it's all worked out. We're just putting in infrastructure, getting it into the right spots, collaborating with the private sector the whole time. It's all got a business play before it's built. It's all got a customer in mind. It's all going to add on to a network that's being engineered. And we put that in and we sign deals that are, well, let me reword it this way. We've had one piece of fiber disconnected from one company in 16 years. Everybody just adds. Okay, and the one that one guy disconnected, another guy took it immediately, and he just stole the customer. We're not going to outthink the private sector. That's a really good question. We chose not to light anything. When you do that, and you get into those layers on the network, I think Michael could talk to this. You know, that equipment's going to last somewhere between 18 and 36 months. That's where the expertise is. We're putting in core infrastructure that I looked at no different than a rail line or a paved runway. It's got a 30-year lifespan. We're signing 20-year irrevocable rights of use with companies to use this fiber. So we're just building base core infrastructure like a port does.
Absolutely, and the skill set really is the same as it was 20 years ago. It's, you know, putting down the road may not be that much different now than it was then. Some of the quality of the road and those kind of things have changed, but it's still the same process pretty much. And it's still true. We placed our fiber on campus in so many ways, and it's really just changing the technology, the actual lines of fiber, and then what's at the end connecting those. And what's at the end is really just changing the speed, and that you can swap out over those next 20, 30 years as the technology evolves. But that base road, that fiber road stays the same. And so ours are spec'd out for 20 years.
Well, Ridgefield certainly has a different makeup in terms of rural and urban and connection there. And I think the key, and I know Nelson's done a great job of this in some of the research we've done in kind of best practices and some challenging projects that have happened around the country. I think the key is that figuring out what are those areas that the private sector is not going to do on their own, or they can't, or they won't do it on their own. CenturyLink and Comcast are key partners for us. They're amazing in terms of responsiveness to business, and I think that's the key, is figuring out, what are those areas where the private sector is not going to lead on that, or can't if there are regulations that prohibit them from doing so, and then trying to stay within that lane and providing that infrastructure. But ports do that really well in terms of that core infrastructure, and in terms of a type of entity that has the wherewithal to be able to put that in place and be out in front and be ready to go before development's there is key. So I don't know in terms of the skill sets required, but I appreciate the policy in terms of sticking to that core infrastructure and then letting the private sector experts do the work in terms of the detailed or ongoing maintenance work. The key to being successful in that is not just having email access. It's about being able to move large amounts of data and access files, similar to what you're talking about. In economic development, it's not necessarily always CAD files or big things like that, but we do a lot of marketing videos, those types of things. And then also just the ability to talk face-to-face with somebody is really important in our industry. And so I see that improving. I also see, I drove up to Belfair in an automated Tesla a couple months ago, so maybe it's working from your car while you're on your way to work, while your car drives you to work or something like that. I'm thinking about connectivity from that standpoint, where you think about what that commute is. Right now it's a dangerous situation because we're in that in-between place where you really should be paying attention to the road, and a lot of people aren't. So there could be potentials there in terms of efficiency, and or for public transportation having that access as well too. If and when we're able to get good transit in, having students be able to use that time and be connected into a network is huge. And in terms of attracting quality students and then also quality outputs, that's going to be big.
And I think keeping those quality graduates here. I had dinner last night with an entrepreneur. He has a 3-person company, and they hire about 5 or 6 contractors. And he's based in Los Angeles, and I'm trying to convince him to move up here. And the infrastructure here is not going to meet his needs. And he's now looking at Portland. But there's so many benefits from my mind to be on this side of the river, and he's not convinced.
Dr. Peterson at the University of Idaho does impact analysis on all of our facilities, and he just updated our middle mile fiber plant as we're starting to model this fiber to the premise. And right now there's 40 direct jobs brought into our region off our fiber plant, and 3.7 million a year in direct impact that's secondary to the ports. And that's from the companies themselves that are using our fiber. That's not counting their customers that are working remote and the tertiary things that go with that. You know, the port commissioners just want to look at real direct impacts on the physical asset, which the tertiary things would be, you know, quite a bigger, maybe a 2.1 to 3 point multiplier off that. So we looked at, we use our GIS system, and we bring in census block and census tract information, and we bring in Department of Transportation interstate and state highway profiles on traffic. And the nice thing about using our GIS system is we can use shapefiles to just trim specifically the areas we're looking at instead of using the whole block or the whole tract like the Census Bureau does. And I ran all the carbon numbers for Whitman County, and they're not worth talking about. But we took a look at Ridgefield's numbers just the other day, and I think our whole year of movement is about a day and a half over here. And you have 5,000 cars, I believe it was, going south off your on-ramp that turns into 80,000 cars a day on I-5 going south. And then we took your employed outside of the area you live in the shapefile, and you've got 96% commute, and that night the average commute is over 18 minutes, and it worked out to 53 million tons of carbon a year if you factor in 25 miles to the gallon with ethanol gasoline. And if you compare that number to the carbon credit modeling that they want to put in place, that would probably be somewhere around 400 to 500. I realize that's $100 is a lot, but a year that you'd be paying if you were making that commute. You know, they, like when you bought your tabs, there'd be that second line item there for your carbon, and it'd be $400 or $500 a year. At 25 miles to the gallon, if you're driving your Dodge diesel pickup, you know, probably be 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Depends how the country's not there yet, but I think we're going there quick.
Where we are right now at the Port of Ridgefield is that we plan to build, own, and maintain the fiber. We wouldn't have necessarily a staff person be the person who does the maintenance, so we would do a competitive bid for a company that would help us with that. And that could be anyone, really. I mean, it's a competitive bid process similar to what we typically do on all contracts like that. So, Joe, maybe you could talk a little bit too about what you guys do in that maintenance concern.
Sure. We have over 150 linear miles of fiber right now, and growing. We she's brilliant, the lady that works at the port. She works part-time. She works 2 days a week to 2.5 days a week, and she manages the fiber and does the master services agreements and the contracts and whatnot, and the back office part of it, and everything else is contracted out. It's all privatized. We have 24/7 knock. We've got emergency restoration services. We do route driving like AT&T did in 1970. Every mile's driven every week. We subcontract out the locates. If it's within 5 feet of us, we've got a guy there on site while they're crossing. We've had one dig up in 15 years, and it was a guy I hired to put in a water line. You can't make this stuff up, man. You know, I mean, right on our own physical property we own too, not even out in the right of way. And, but it's a great question, and it's a challenge. But, you know, our port commissioners, the port facilitates the infrastructure and the economic development and capitalization where needed. And, you know, I've said this about 8 times, 9 different ways tonight. You know, the private sector's always there, very agile, very nimble, always ready to take care. And we have 17 companies riding on our fiber. And I would say 8 of those we've got on an escalation list that if we ever were to have a problem, they're saying we'll send splicers too. We'll send equipment too, just let us know.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of this model, is you're not dependent on just one provider. You know, you can really renew that SLA with those companies based on their performance, and you get to have these relationships where you can ensure it's going to work. It's actually brilliant.